here this morning with John Gordon, author of the book Fighting for MacArthur, the Navy and Marine Corps Desperate Defense of the Philippines. It's the 70th anniversary of that, John.
It is.
Perfect timing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good book. Now, I'm a Marine, okay? And I know I've talked to you about this, but Marines don't, just the title, Fighting for MacArthur, turns off a lot of Marines. And I might have mentioned to you that I wasn't a fan of MacArthur necessarily after reading about Guadalcanal. There's an old saying in the Marine Corps about will we ever forgive MacArthur for the lack of support at the Guadalcanal and other island campaigns? And the answer is yes, that there is a date. It's the 12th of never.
The 12th of never. I love it. That's very good. I love it.
The title turned me off a bit, but then when I started turning pages, it's a one of a kind. I've never read a book like it. What drove you to writing this book?
Sure, and as you know, I'm a retired Army officer. I'm a retired Army field artilleryman. And I had long been into this campaign. In fact, when I was in high school in Massachusetts, when my dad retired from the Navy, I read my first book on this campaign called Corregidor, the Saga of a Fortress. That started many, many years of being interested in this campaign. By the time I got in the Army, I graduated from Citadel in '77, I had done enough research that by that point that I felt comfortable to start writing some things myself. So being an Army officer, I was mostly interested in the Army part of the campaign. And I wrote articles for Army Magazine and Field Artillery and other military review about the mostly Army part of this Army-dominated campaign. Mm-hmm. But as the years went by, it occurred to me no one had ever done a book that focused on what the sailors and Marines did in this largely Army campaign. And there was a lot of really unique stories. There were some one-of-a-kinds by the Navy and the Marine Corps took place in this campaign. Like sailors fighting as infantry, for example, mm-hmm. Under the tutelage of their Marine comrades. Mm-hmm. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I approached the Naval Institute Press in Annapolis and said, no one had, there's bits and pieces of the story here and there. There have been some articles and there's bits and pieces of it in different books, but no one's told a coherent story about what the sea services did in that first Philippine campaign. Would you guys be interested in a book on this? And I got a very positive reaction from them. So I really worked on the book from 2007 to 2010, sent it to the Naval Institute Press in the fall of 2010, and then it came out in October of 2011. And again, that was the main goal of my book. Someone very interested in this campaign for a long time, who had written about it, about the Army parts of it. It was time for someone to tell the Navy and Marine Corps part of the story. And as I got into the story, I can understand completely why the Navy and Marine Corps to this day don't have a whole lot of love and sympathy for Douglas MacArthur. That definitely came out in my research, and I tried to write candidly about that in the book.
Yeah, you did a good job too. And MacArthur's a great general, and we admire and respect him for that. But looking back and seeing what you put in the book here, it's really, really insightful for me. I really enjoy it, and I know our readers will. All that extensive research, you'd read a lot before, and when you got down in the research, were there some things you discovered that you hadn't thought about at all?
Absolutely, and I had a lot of research on the campaign built up over the years, and then when I made an outline of what I wanted the book to look like, I discovered, okay, now I've got some gaps. Now I need to start filling in those gaps before I start writing seriously. So using Marine Corps history resources here in Quantico, the MacArthur Memorial down in Norfolk, which was extremely helpful to me. The Army War College up in Carlisle has got a lot of information, and living in the Northern Virginia area, I also had access to the National Archives. So I was very fortunate that geographically I was in easy access of where all the key materials were that I needed to get into to do the book. There were some things, I had some incredibly lucky finds. For example, there's a chapter in the book about the incident during the fighting on Bataan when the Japanese made an amphibious landing on the southern, almost the southern tip of Bataan. And when I was down at the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, they got a terrific archives down there. And they had a translated copy of a Japanese officer's diary which had survived the campaign. It was evacuated from the Philippines before U.S. forces surrender, along with other captured Japanese documents. It's down there in Norfolk now at the MacArthur Memorial. And for years, they weren't quite sure what this, the story of this Japanese captain was all about. So they shared the diary with me. They had a translation of it. And lo and behold, this Japanese officer named Captain Hideka, he happened to be the senior officer in this Japanese landing force of about 300 men that came ashore at the southern tip of Bataan, and he's the guy that the Provisional Naval Battalion fought against. Battalion of about 500 sailors and a little less than 100 Marines fighting together as infantrymen. And so I was just incredibly fortunate to find things like that during my research. So when I wrote about that particular fighting, when the Naval Battalion was fighting against this Japanese amphibious landing, I was able to provide the Japanese perspective, because here was this guy's diary that had been stashed away at the MacArthur Memorial for all these years.
Yeah, great. I would point out to our listeners and encourage them to read the book that you also start with the start. It focuses on Bataan, Corregidor, and what goes on in the Philippines, but it talks about the forces that came out of China, Singapore, and other areas, and tells a lot of the history of how these forces ended up there. Marines out of North China, Marines and sailors out of Singapore and China. What sticks out in your mind about that?
I think the 4th Marines had of course, eventually they end up surrendering on Corregidor in May 1942. The only time in history the Marine Corps lost a regiment in combat, despite their great performance they put in. But learning about the period immediately before the start of the war, the 4th Marines and the China gunboats that the Navy had operating on the Yangtze River in Hong Kong, they barely made their escape. The 4th Marine Regiment was evacuated from China on 2 chartered liners less than a week before the war started. So they barely made it to the Philippines from Shanghai. Same thing with these China gunboats that during typhoon season had to sail across the South China Sea to get to the Philippines through appalling weather for ships that were never designed to be in typhoons out on the open sea. And of course, you mentioned the North China Marines. They didn't make it. There were about 200 Marines and sailors up as the embassy guards and legation guards up in North China. They were getting ready to depart. They were in the process of loading out when the war started, and those guys got captured in China. And again, the 4th Marines made their escape, but 200 guys up in North China didn't.
Well, you've got a lot of things. This is the 70th anniversary of that campaign. You've got some things going on in the next few weeks. Would you like to touch on those quickly? Sure.
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate in the reaction to the book. It's accomplished what I hoped it would as far as telling the story. I've had about a dozen book events as of today. And I'll be speaking at the Army Navy Club in Washington on the evening of the 25th of April. And I was very fortunate. I've gotten an invitation from the commanding officer of the USS Bataan down in Norfolk to go down and speak on the ship about the subject. Probably it's going to be sometime in early May, and then other events are also being scheduled. I've been asked to give a presentation on the book at the big military air show that's going to be taking place at the Manassas Airport on the 10th of May, Saturday the 10th of May, it's been just a wonderful experience having people contact me. My father was in that campaign. My grandfather was in that campaign. My grandfather was in the 4th Marines. He was captured by the Japanese. And, I got your book to learn more about what grandfather went through. That's an incredible experience when you get that kind of reaction from people.
Well, we really appreciate you coming down today, and we appreciate the Naval Institute Press giving us this book.